What's up, everybody? Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retweet. My name is David Hockney, and today we're talking about MVPs. No, we're not talking about Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, or Montel Vontavious Porter. We're talking about the MVPs of WWE's Ruthless Aggression era. Now, this was a time where WWE had just progressed out of the Attitude Era, and it made some really big names as a result. So today, me and the panel are going to be doing a deep dive into some of these memorable names, and we'll discuss who made the biggest impact during this time and who became the stars of the era we now know today. So before we kick off with the debate, I just want to remind everybody that we've got new content coming out every Thursday on this channel, Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retweet. And we also have our extra feed, Suplex Retweet Extra, where we have tons of great content with you, including Wednesday Night Wars, Alba Good Graps, Eats Meets West, and of course, the ever popular Saturday Draft Live. And if you want to keep up to date with all the content we have on Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retweet, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Suplex Retweet. And be sure you're subscribed to us on all good podcasting sites, whether it be iTunes, Anchor, Spotify, or any good Android podcasting sites. Be sure to visit the website as well, suplexretweet.com, for all the interviews, articles, and everything else in between. And also on our YouTube channel, Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retweet, we have our Quiz Showdown series where you can check that out and see how well our general knowledge is when it comes to wrestling. So now that that's out of the way, let's introduce the MVPs of Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retweet. So up first, in light of the new Eats Meets West episode that's come out on the Suplex Retweet Extra feed, the subtitle of that episode is Everything is Evil. Although this man's just not quite evil enough. You could say he's quasi-evil, semi-evil, the margarine of evil, the Diet Coke of evil, just 1 calorie, not evil enough. It is Scott McLeod.
I really like that, Dave. Thank you very much.
Well, Scotty, don't.
Scotty, don't.
I mean, you don't. I love that.
As a younger sibling, I've been told by Ross I'm often like the Ruthless Aggression era to his Attitude era in terms of how much our parents love us. And that I've got some highlights, but overall more disappointing than the person that came before me.
I'm just glad that more than one of us on this panel got the Austin Powers reference, so I'm pleased with that.
I actually was quite happy that that was the only thing Scott's ever been semi at that's not been disappointing. He's fine.
Oh,
no comment.
And just as you heard him there, our next panelist is currently in the midst of the ongoing Best of 5 series between Anyway Back to the Wrestling and the Raw Report, although he's falling flatter than Kenzo Suzuki's singles run. It is Ryan Gallagher.
See, that's a Japanese reference that I do not get. The only Japanese thing I watch. Never mind, we're not getting into
and we'll just cut you off there before we get in trouble. So up next, as much as we enjoy a good battle rap from the Ruthless Aggression era, this guy is less like the Doctor of Thugonomics and more like Spanky. It is Chris Murray.
Hi! Thanks, David. I liked it. David, just for you, this is just for the video, but just for you, I wore a t-shirt which you were there the first time I wore it out the house in 2012. My CM Punk t-shirt.
Yeah, I remember. That was this was a time where you were at the peak of your radio abilities now.
I'm nowhere near the peak anymore.
I was expecting a string vest there.
I won't ask why you're suggesting it's a string vest, but anyway. And obviously, all the great content we have here on Eat, Sleep, Suplex, couldn't be accomplished without the real MVP behind the scenes. And no, he's not our Montel Vontavious Porter. He is, in fact,
Dave, you've already done my intro.
No, I'm not talking about you, Ryan. I'm talking about the MVP. He is Mr. Kwakuaji.
I mean, it was all well and good.
Kwakuaji.
Thank you very much. It was all well and good. I liked how you said that with conviction and pride. Next time, though, we'll work on making it just a little bit longer, just to kind of stretch it out as much as I can. But good job first time around. Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm so tempted to make a really funny joke right now, but
crack on. I'm not stopping you.
I was hoping one of the other.
You making a funny joke, Dave. There's a fuss for everything. I kid. I thought somebody else would have said that, but you know.
We
See-
probably
see
don't
the-
need to worry about making Kwaku any longer than he already is.
Hey. On that topic, by the way, I wanted to make a point before we start. For anybody else watching the video version of this, Quacky, I think you're trying to sell me a calendar right now. I don't know, it's just the way you're sitting there, man. It's very sexual. You're kind of looking into my eyes. Like, do you want the new Kwaku calendar?
It's like just my natural pose.
The
Wait till you
Quacklander.
see. Wait till you see December. That will come later on, or when the camera stops rolling.
It definitely will come later on. You're right, mate.
Right, can we get into the show, please, before we mention our topic? All right, so today it's going to be kind of like an open panel discussion / debate. Now, we've had this kind of format on Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retweet before, where we've discussed WrestleMania venues, WrestleMania's main events, among some of the topics we've discussed. But today we're going to be discussing who was the real MVP of the Ruthless Aggression era. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask each of our panel members to pick a wrestler from the Ruthless Aggression era, and I want them to argue their case as to why their selection is the real MVP of the Ruthless Aggression era. Now, I've asked them to pick 2 each because we're going to do 1 in each half. I will then challenge said pick, as will the other panelists, and the object of this show is to basically make the best case for your selected superstar. Is everybody clear on that?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, Ryan, I'm going to start off with you. Who do you believe is the MVP of the Ruthless Aggression era?
So, Dave, I'm just going to totally flip the narrative on this, and I actually want the guys to prove to me why this person is not the MVP. So I'm going to flip it a little bit for this. My first pick as MVP of the Ruthless Aggression era is Mr. Ruthless Aggression himself, Mr. John Cena. You know, when you put this out here, I was the first one to get in on my pick when I picked Cena, and I know for a fact that would have been the first person everybody wanted to pick. So I kind of feel like this is a null and void argument. John Cena, we wouldn't have the Ruthless Aggression era without John Cena, without him coming out challenging Kurt Angle and him asking what he's got, and he said Ruthless Aggression. That set the tone for everything that followed after that. The way that John Cena was when he first started, it was like taking somebody from being nothing, putting everything behind them, and throwing them right up to the stardom that John Cena got to. I just want to know why this is even a show. Why are we doing the MVPs? John Cena wins this hands down. Like, can somebody put a question to me on this one?
Do any of our panelists want to present any questions to Ryan? Because I've got a couple myself, but I'd like to see what you guys all think.
Okay, so right off the bat, can you name some of the greatest people that John Cena had rivalries with in the Ruthless Aggression era? Go for it.
Absolutely not, no.
Why?
Because, mate, he had rivalries with everybody.
Yeah, but name me some great people, because when you talk about MVPs and like in the Attitude Era, you talk about like your Rock, your Austin, and your Undertaker, and you can name Triple H as well, Michaels. You can name all the great opponents that they've had in that era. Name me a great person that he had a full-blown rivalry with, and that is an absolute legend of the time. Ruthless Aggression.
Edge.
Okay, that's one. Any others?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Oh no, there we go. So if that was so
on the
great,
spot. No, my
exactly.
point.
No, you asked me to. You came here pretty much unzipped your jeans and then said that I am the greatest, and I'm come here to say no, you're not, and then you can't put it back up.
My point isn't based on individual people that John Cena had rivalries with. My point on John Cena being the MVP of this is that we wouldn't have this without John Cena. John Cena had rivalries, and you're asking me for names. I've not got names wrote down in front of me because I don't need to. John Cena had rivalries with absolutely every top star of that time. Everybody from, 2006 roughly, or whenever it was that he was kind of peak at that point. John Cena had rivalries with absolutely everybody. John Cena gets criticised for not putting folk over too much because he had rivalries with every single person that was possibly on the roster at that point. So my point on John Cena being MVP isn't based on individual matches or individual great rivalries that he had. It's John Cena actually being the top guy of WWE for this whole period of time. We wouldn't have got the Ruthless Aggression era without John Cena.
I like what you're saying, Ryan. However, my only issue with it is there's a difference between the man who invented the ruthless aggression era and the man who was the most valuable player of it. For instance, the golden era of wrestling is defined by Hulk Hogan, but Hulk Hogan is by no means the best wrestler of that period of time. It's the same argument for John Cena and the ruthless aggression era. You can sort of say, yes, John Cena is the biggest star of the era, but most valuable is where I think he stumbles.
John Cena was the most valuable guy, even after this era as well. Even after this era moved on, John Cena was still the most valuable guy in the company. So, going by that, if you conquer numerous eras, you're going to be in top of the one that we're talking about that you start, surely.
I'd like to make a couple of points here. Like, starting with the point that Greg was making earlier about great rivalries we've seen. I mean, are we forgetting his epic rivalry with Jesus or Jesus over that great storyline that he apparently stabbed Cena in a nightclub at one time? I mean, great rivalries like that. I think the thing with Cena is there's a difference between being as accomplished in a certain era as Cena definitely was, holding the title for nearly a year, which hadn't been done in some time. But we're forgetting the last few years of the Resurrection era are the beginning of what is basically the anti-Super Cena sentiment from the crowd. I mean, you look at One Night Stand 2006, those people only a year into Cena's run as a top guy are immediately like, yeah, we're kind of done with this. We're bored of this. And the thing with the last few years of Cena's run at the top in 06, 07, this was the period where you could have made some great changes with Cena that would have carried him further on, and he would be a guy at the top of the eras that would come, and people would still be okay with it because he started as a rapper. That's what got him over. Then they started taking that away from him, and they changed him into what WWE wanted, and then he would go into the next era and be even more of what WWE wanted him. So right on that, yeah, he was basically the case of he was a guy who was popular at the start, but and certainly in some fans' eyes, I don't think he was the most valuable person they had at the time because they were already starting to get sick. And there are two WrestleManias Cena should not have main evented because fans booed the ending of WrestleMania. Before they were booing Roman Reigns, they were booing Cena beating Triple H at WrestleMania 22 despite Cena being the face, and they booed him beating Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 23.
But is that not the fan perception though? I'm talking about somebody being the most valuable player of that time. You're talking about Cena getting booed, Cena not main eventing, or it shouldn't have main evented a certain WrestleMania or another WrestleMania, or going the kind of latter part of this era of Cena being the top guy. You said it yourself, Cena was the top guy, regardless if he was getting booed, regardless if people turned on him. He was the top guy. He was getting every main event going. He was getting pushed out there, whether people liked him or loved him. He was getting put out in the spotlight, and he was a top guy. So that, to me, that is an MVP. He is the most valuable. The reason that Cena never left WWE at any point is because he was so valuable to the company as a whole.
Can I just challenge you something, Ryan? Because I was watching back on the Ruthless Aggression series on the WWE Network, and I watched John Cena's episode specifically, and somebody said right at the start, do you think that he defined Ruthless, or did he succeed at the start of the Ruthless Aggression era? And he's come out and said multiple times in that episode that he failed. So what do you think So what's your response to that, knowing that he came from OVW in 2002 and he was basically just this prototype character and it basically with his first run in the company?
If we talk about the Ruthless Aggression era, if you talk about it roughly starting when Cena had that match against Angle, right, and that's kind of when the wheels set in motion for that whole era, he's not going to be the top guy at the very start, is he? He's not going to come in to, as a trainee, ultimately, is what he was at that point. He came in as an absolute nobody. He had to build his character through that era. The era was happening after he announced the era was start happening. If that's, I know he never technically started the era, but he did in a roundabout way start the Ruthless Aggression era. That's where it came from. So he's not going to start off at the top of his game. He's going to have to build into it. So if we really talk about an MVP, you want to look at somebody who is at the end of their run. So whether they left the company during the Ruthless Aggression era or whether they stayed until the very end of that era, you look at somebody at that point, Cena going from a relatively, well, not relative, he was a nobody, up to Super Cena, as Scott put it. That is somebody succeeding. That is somebody becoming the MVP. You don't just come in as the MVP.
Can I just want to ask the sort of general, just open this up to the panel, just because I'm getting wary of timing here. What did you guys all think of Doctor of Thugonomics Cena?
Loved it.
Love that.
Yep, absolutely loved it.
So you're kind of balancing both sides of the argument here. You know, you're saying he got a ton of hate as Super Cena, but yet we all loved him when he was freestyling as Doctor Thugonomics. So it looks like you've got you could argue it both ways in some aspects,
Because
but
it felt less forced and less. It was just more. You know what I mean? It just felt more natural.
yeah,
Rather than going from this absolute funk gangster to suddenly being a super face guy with a gangster accent. It was just weird.
mm-hmm.
It just didn't cut it for me.
One other point that just crept into my mind there: the Spinner Championships. Do you think that damaged his? Do you think that damaged his credibility?
I mean, I would have put forward a better case if he hadn't done that. But but I still stand by it.
I think the US Spinner is probably my second favorite US title after the one that we just got rid of.
The US is okay. The US one was okay. So when you went to the WWE title, you thought, right, nah.
The solid WWE title was great. Not the spinning one, but the actual, like, it looked a bit daft because, you know, it was always like lopsided and stuff like that. But the actual one that, you know, would go on to be used by CM Punk and stuff like that for the next, I don't know, 6 years or something like that. Really liked that belt.
Yep. Okay. Fair enough. Well, thank you, Ryan. That's so you argue that John Cena is the MVP, and I think you put forward quite a lot of good points. Although I think the guys challenged you with just as many. So let's hope that balances you out. So I'm gonna come to you now, Chris. So who do you think was the real MVP of the Ruthless Aggression era?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, gather around, take a seat. Allow me to tell you a story, or tell you a tale of a man who I feel is the most important wrestler of 2002 to 2008, despite only being around for the first 3 years of it. That man is Eddie Guerrero. He arrived in WWF at the time back in January 2000. He wasn't doing a whole lot. Like, he was sort of bouncing around the IC and European title scene with China and the Radicals for about 16 months. It then went rapidly downhill as he got sent to rehab in May 2001. He eventually got kicked out of the company in November 2001. But he re-signed in April the following year. So when Ruthless Aggression started in June 2002, Guerrero was already rising up the WWE totem pole. Now, he's back in the Intercontinental scene for a bit with RVD, but after moving to SmackDown in the draft lottery, it's here where we get the first big moment of Eddie's superstardom. 15th of August, 2002. The era of Ruthless Aggression is still wet behind the ears. This was the date that he started teaming with his nephew Chavo as Los Guerreros. They turned face at the start of 2003. They became a huge part of the amazing SmackDown tag team scene. And of course, he was one of the essential members of the SmackDown 6, which I'm not going to get into too much because we'll need a whole episode to talk about that. So I'm not going to go into it here. And then after putting on these huge tag matches for the best part of 12 months, Los Guerreros eventually split and feud with each other. And then Eddie finally earns the biggest opportunity of his entire career in early 2004, which is a WWE Championship match against Brock Lesnar at No Way Out. He cuts the speech of a lifetime, his infamous Addict promo, before beating Brock for the belt at No Way Out. There may have been some help, but we won't go into that. It doesn't help with my argument. This moment, in my opinion, is the biggest feel-good underdog moment in the history of WWE. It's not Kofi, it's not D-Bry, it's not even Little Ray Ray, but this one, and I promise this isn't just hyperbole for you guys on the podcast, he continued this success through to WrestleMania 20 when he defended the WWE title against Kurt Angle in an absolute classic Eddie match. And WrestleMania 20 ended with him arm in arm with Chris Benoit. And this image, again, in my opinion, is the one single image which best defines the Ruthless Aggression era. He would go on to lose the title to JBL in this brutal Texas bull rope match before another stellar tag run and feud with Rey Mysterio. And the sad end to this story, of course, is that Eddie wasn't given the chance to compete in the final years of Ruthless Aggression because he tragically passed away in November 2005, a death which, again, will go down as one of the most impactful moments of this entire wrestling era. So right now we're chatting about Ruthless Aggression MVPs. For me, it is Eddie Guerrero. Eddie, in this period of time, had stellar singles matches, tag matches, ladder matches, brutal, death matches with JBL almost. He wrestled for basically every belt, whether it's the US title with Big Show, the tag titles with Chavo or Ray, or even the WWE Championship. He achieved a Grand Slam in this time, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. So for me, Eddie was good before Ruthless Aggression, but it was this period of time that he became great. Thank you.
That's a very solid argument, Chris. I'd be impressed to see what the guys have to come up with in terms of challenging you. So, Kwaku, Scott, and Ryan, what do you think would hamper Chris's argument here?
I've got a couple of points I want to make. First off, it seems very coincidental that our host here was on the Wrestling Hero show last week, mentioning Eddie Guerrero as his hero. So it just feels like Chris is trying to curry favour in these arguments.
See, that would be a very good point, but I did not know that because I've not listened to last week's show yet.
Oh, games are bogey there.
Chris, what the hell?
But
sorry, guys.
So a couple of points I want to make is one, like we all remember when Eddie won the WWE Championship, and I have to say it started off great. I loved that match with him and Angle. I remember having a video of WrestleMania 20 and loving that finish with the boot coming off and everything like that. But the thing is, from there on, that WWE title reign that he had, that could have been one of the decade-defining WWE title reigns, because it's the story of the guy who finally got the title and everybody wanted him to get it. But the one biggest enemy against Eddie Guerrero is clearly himself. I'm not talking about his issues that made him go to Rhea. I'm talking about his own confidence, because by all accounts, that WWE title reign ended apparently a few months earlier than it was supposed to, all down to Eddie Guerrero putting too much pressure on himself. And because there were low attendance at the time for SmackDown live events, and he put that down to himself as a champion, and that then led him to getting the belt taken off him quite early and rushed on to JBL only a few months into his heel run. And I think it's a case of if you don't have the confidence in yourself to be the top guy, it's very hard for a company to trust you with their top belt. And I know they wanted to put the world title on him before his untimely passing, but you can see that's still a year on, so it took them a while for him to get the confidence back for him to put the belt on him. And plus, you mentioned the US title. Yeah, he's the first ever WWE version of the US champion, and yet I couldn't tell you a single thing about his US title other than the fact he dropped it to Big Show. That should be a memorable reign. The first ever US champion. He should be guys elevating this new title that's been reintroduced into the company. I can't remember.
Did he not make Big Show essentially? Did he not give Big Show explosive diarrhea with some really bad burritos?
But that doesn't say anything about him as US champion. It just says about Eddie himself as a character and how mischievous he is. It doesn't say anything about him as US champion. That's how you center around a feud with this title that's just been reintroduced. A feud centered around diarrhea does not elevate this brand new reintroduced title.
I think that the issue with that US title, I'll go through both bits. I think the issue with that US title at that time was that issue wasn't limited to Eddie Guerrero. Like I said a few weeks ago on a show, an unnamed show, we were talking about Big Show when he held that title, and he defended it twice over the course of 8 months before dropping it to Cena. And then Cena's run with that title, he got punched in the back. That's kind of all I remember about it. And then Carlito had I think, and I don't remember anything about that. And I feel like that's more of a product of the fact that they had to have a secondary title on SmackDown. And I feel like they almost didn't know what to do with it. To go back to the first bit, yes, I agree with that whole bit about Eddie definitely felt a lot of pressure on himself. But I feel like that is something that was very token for this era, because if you look at all of the title runs around, like all of the young guys getting their first title runs, they're all sort of short establishing reigns. If you look at Jeff Hardy, CM Punk, stuff like that, if you take out, you have to sort of take out guys like Hogan, Cena, and Batista, who all went on these massive first title runs. But like most of them, they sort of have these like short establishing runs. I think Edge had the same as well before losing it at TLC to Cena. And that's almost like, oh, let's see how he gets on with the belt, and then we'll come back to it. And I think this is something that definitely feels like they were planning with Eddie. Like they were lining him up for that second run. They always seem to sort of have a good heel run for a character early on in their career, a la Edge, Punk, to sort of establish whether or not they're a good champion or not. And before you know it, it's like 2 years down the line, you're like, oh, that's a former world champion. Like that guy can hold the belt again. It's almost the same more recently with guys like, this happened at the start of Sheamus's career, happened at the start of Jack Swagger's career, Dolph Ziggler, like all these guys that held belts for really short amounts of time. It was basically just to establish whether they were any good at it. And I do feel like this was a sort of precursor to a much longer and better period of Eddie's career that, you know, sadly we're just not going to know anything about.
Do you know, I'm going to say, like, and this is probably going to be quite controversial because I know how much everybody loves Eddie Guerrero, and I did as well. You know, I love watching him. I go back and watch his matches just now. I think Eddie as a wrestler was one of the best. You could probably argue that Eddie, if it was based on just pure wrestling, was the MVP. He was one of the best in the ring. I just feel like everything that he done had these kind of highlight moments, you know, winning the titles, having the burrito thing, you know, wee points that you remember, you know. But apart from that, you probably couldn't remember what he does week in, week out. I know you can't remember what most folk do week in, week out, but I feel like all his things are only memorable but spaced out quite a bit between. I feel like he's quite disappointing in that sense, where they could have done far much more with him week in, week out than what they did. That might just be not down to him. That might be down to the company.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it is down to the company. But, you know, I feel like he's one of these guys that just gets big moments and then followed by nothing for a wee while until he loses a title, and then he has another big moment where he wins another title.
This is what I was saying last week. This is what I was saying last week, though. Like, no matter what you gave Eddie, he will run away with it and he'll make it memorable. That big storyline of him and Dominic and Rey Mysterio, that is an absolute tragedy of a story. That story should not be entertainment, but yet he made it so engaging and so funny. And your pappy reading in bedroom stories to Dominic, it was funny. Obviously, at the time, it was just like, that is so evil, but it's funny. He just ran away with those kind of things. Oh, sorry, I was meant to be debating Chris, but sorry.
Yeah, you're meant to be arguing against him.
I like Eddie. I like Eddie too much.
All right. Well,
the last little point I want to make on it, David, just like see, obviously, just before we came on, I did the old thing of just being like, oh, I wonder what Eddie was up to 2002 to 2005, and I do feel like every single little thing that he was going through over those years, I did remember quite vividly. Like the Eddie and Chavo saga of the tag matches, there's so many highlights that everyone remembers. And then when they broke up and had those brutal matches, I think Royal Rumble, I can't remember what number, and then Eddie going on to win the title, I think was, you know, that's one of my favorite moments in wrestling ever. Mm-hmm. And then going on to have his battle with Rey as well. I don't know. The thing is, Eddie and possibly another man that we're going to talk about soon, they suffer from the fact that because they died, they're going to get glorified for years to come. But I'm still going to have him as my guy.
You know what? I think that was that opening monologue definitely was a strong argument, but I think the guys brought up some excellent points as well about, you know, what was holding him back. So thank you for that, Chris. Up next, Scott, who have you got?
Well, when we were working out who we were going to pick, and we said we'd define the Ruthless Aggression era from June 2002 to June 2008. Mm-hmm. And so I thought about, when it comes to my picks, think about where people were at the start in June 2002 and where they ended up by 2008. And from that regard, I think you can't really look past the person I'm going to pick, and that is Edge. Because in June 2002, he was again a part of the SmackDown 6. He was coming off a WrestleMania match with Booker T, where the only storyline they could get for them being on WrestleMania was to fight over a shampoo endorsement, which ironically, a wee while ago, earlier today, I actually saw a clip with Edge on Booker T's podcast talking about it, and how that was also going to be a hair match at one point, but it ended up not being because Booker didn't want to cut his hair because he knew he was going to lose. And so also that led to Angle. But so in June 2002, you have Edge just broken up from Christian. He's come off this weird run with Hogan with their tag champs. And basically, Edge is the plucky babyface. He's got randomly Rob Zombie as his entrance music. And he main events the first ever SmackDown exclusive pay-per-view Rebellion 02 in a handicap match against Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman. And then he gets injured, and that's the neck issues that would really almost make him retire. And then he came back earlier this year, as we know. But then he comes back, and in 04, he turns heel by attacking Shawn Michaels. And I remember watching this because at this time, there were two people in wrestling that I absolutely despised. One of them was Edge, the other one was Triple H, but everybody hated Triple H at this time. But I hated Edge so much from 04, and then to 05, and then on to 06. And he just became, I think, the defining heel of this era, going on to win Money in the Bank, the stuff with Lita and Matt Hardy. He set the tone for the Money in the Bank cash-in with that cash-in on Cena. And I remember watching that the next day and being raging that Edge was now the WWE champion. And then, obviously, that title ended very quickly. But he recovered with a career-defining match against Mick Foley at WrestleMania 22 with the Flaming Table spot. And then he moves to SmackDown, where he becomes, again, the heel of SmackDown. He becomes the World Heavyweight Champion. And he's in feuds with Batista and Undertaker. And then, as I said, he goes from a Mania where the only way he can get on is over a bloody shampoo to 2008. He's main eventing WrestleMania against The Undertaker. And there was even serious consideration to him breaking the streak. That's how much faith they had in him. Even Undertaker would have wanted it. But Edge himself said, I can't do it. I just have too much respect to Undertaker as a legend, as a locker room leader, to break the streak. And I can't think of any other reason why Edge shouldn't be the MVP.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about one thing, Scott. Edge did set the bar for a lot of things, capitalizing on the Money in the Bank opportunity, and, he raised the bar when it comes to being a dastardly heel. I don't know, guys, do you question anything about the Rated R Superstar?
Everything was fine up until the last point, Scott. The thing about The Undertaker, if he was such an MVP, then he should be able to break the streak. He shouldn't have to say, oh no, I'd respect it too much to break it, if you get what I mean. That's a bit of a false argument to this.
Well, yeah, no, though, because, he's been trusted to be in the main event of WrestleMania against The Undertaker. And really, the feud continued afterwards, so they still had the faith in him. I think it's just the idea of him respecting a veteran. I don't think that should go against him as a locker room leader. I think it's just he is a guy who is a lifelong fan of wrestling. He's a fan at heart, like most wrestlers are. And I think it's just a respect for those who came before him. I don't think how that should go against him as an MVP.
I find it quite tough to argue against that. Apart from the fact that he had that stupid spinner belt with the R on it, that deserves to cancel out everything that he ever does in the wrestling from that point forward. But
they'll had it for a few weeks, though.
True.
I can forgive him because I think it's more making fun of Cena rather than promoting himself. If you
it was absolutely horrendous, regardless.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he did throw Cena's belt in the river, though. So
this is true as well. That is true. No, do you know? I actually find it quite tough to argue against Edge, only because I've got my second pick coming up later on, and it's an out there pick. Edge probably would have been my second choice. Realistically, would have been my second choice in this. I find it really tough to argue against his career over that period of time. The only thing that do you know what? No, I can't even argue against that. There's nothing that I can pick in what Scott said to really go against Edge. Everything that he done was absolute gold. The matches that he had, and you're talking about him potentially breaking the streak. I think he would have been quite happy. He could have quite easily carried that burden if he had been wanting to break the streak. I just don't think he wanted to. I think it wasn't a choice of I don't want it because I can't. It was I don't want it because I'm making the choice of not wanting to. I don't want to be that guy.
Scott, I do have one question about your choice of Edge. You picked up on the fact he was one of the first people to win the SmackDown Tag Team Championships with Rey Mysterio. He only held that championship for 9 days, and I think that set a precedent for Edge's title runs over this period. Yes, he did win a lot of championships during that time, but he lost them just as quickly. I
know why you know this, because that's how you lost the belt recently, because you missed out the question on Edge's cumulative days as champion, wasn't it?
No, that wasn't.
That was me. That was me. I asked him about Heath Slater's days as a tag champion.
No. That was me guessing Heath Slater's tag team championship.
Right. Sorry, my bad.
But my argument is this that the thing with Edge, I think him losing the belt back to Cena is basically a case of they wanted him to be a foil for Cena to go up against, and he was, as we mentioned earlier, he was only one of Cena's only rivals that Ryan could remember, and so they had this thing where they exchanged the belt, and then on SmackDown, I think the thing with him, Batista, and then Undertaker is a case of, well, they were, he's maybe heel, he got Hawkins, Ryder, Vicky Guerrero, and Chavo all around him as the heel faction. I think it's very much like a Triple H back in the day in that he would lose the belt, but then get it back, and you're like, you're happy, yeah, the heel's been foiled, and then he's somehow through some loophole, or because the heel authority figure is backing him, he's got the belt back, and that makes you hate him even more. Like, God, I thought we were done with him as the champion, and then eventually he's foiled. He, like, in June 2008, he is finally foiled when Batista beats him up after he fails to win the title, and CM Punk cashes on him, the guy who's cashing on two people, finally got his comeuppance by having someone cash in on him. He's now on the receiving end of the money that cash in and having to lose his title when he's not prepared to defend it.
So your main argument is that he played the perfect villain during this time?
Yes, like I said, he was one of the defining heels of the time, especially on SmackDown, because they needed it.
Let's not forget as well, 2006 Raw, Edge and Lita.
I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who will probably want to try and remember that. But anyway, thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
I'll take that into consideration. And so all that's left for the first half now is the MVP himself, Kwaku.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Hold on a minute, players, because something I actually noticed. Something I actually noticed from when Chris brought up Eddie Guerrero, there was a little bit of a split in the camp, right? So what I'm going to do, there's 4 of you here. I'm going to get Chris and David, right? And then I'm going to get Scott and Ryan, and then we're going to have ourselves a tag team match, because my MVP is none other than the greatest general manager of all time, and I will fight you to the death on that point alone. It is Theodore Teddy Long. This man is an absolute legend. Look at the ways, right? We're in 2020. The amount of times I see on wrestling hashtags and stuff. Exactly, Dave's even doing the dance. I mean, Dave can't dance, and he's still doing the dance, right?
Ryan's doing the dance too.
Yeah, Ryan's doing the dance. He's
phenomenal.
That's how I dance, to be fair.
Exactly. Like just to feel good. Just the way his gifts are still used. Like, you're going to have yourself a tag team match. You're going one-on-one with The Undertaker. The man is an insistent gag. He's one of those comedians where they keep saying the same joke over and over again. And you know it's coming, but you never get sick of it. And my biggest heartbreak a couple of years ago was when Raw was going to have a new general manager after Mick Foley. And it was just when Theodore Long was inducted into the Hall of Fame, as he should have been straight away. And then Vince McMahon says he's a Hall of Famer. And Teddy Long comes in and he says, "No, Teddy, it's not you. My heart was sunk. I wanted it to be Teddy Long." That man was magic. Look at the way he had Vince McMahon's picture in his office as if he was like the world president or something like that. He just took little things and just made it so memorable. Everyone's going one-on-one with The Undertaker. Everyone was going in a tag team match. It was brilliant. It was riveting stuff. And he just made it. And I love him so much for that. I'm sorry, guys, but this man is the MVP of the Ruthless Aggression era. He's the guy you talk about most. He's the guy's catchphrase you talk about the most. That is the MVP. End of discussion. And with that, I bid you adieu. Thank you. Good night.
I mean, it's certainly an interesting choice. It's the first non-active competitor or non-active superstar at the time that we've been brought up in this discussion. So Ryan, what do you have to say to that?
I tell you something. I'll go on to Kwaku's point in a minute about him being the MVP. I'm not fully buying that. All I will say though, as a man who regularly watches SmackDown, sometimes there's a show on it for Enemy Back to the Wrestling.
Once a month.
SmackDown could desperately do with a Teddy Long right now.
Thank you.
We need a GM just now and on SmackDown. Actually, on both, but mainly SmackDown. They're kind of just making the running matches just now. We need somebody like that. But anyway, we'll go on to something else. Teddy Long is great. Teddy Long is brilliant. We talk about the catchphrases, we talk about the dancing and stuff like that. Teddy Long does not even hold a candle to any of the guys that we've mentioned previously in terms of being an MVP of this era. I'm sorry, I'm not having it. Like
You're the first of all of us to go one-on-one with the Undertaker for
mate,
that comment.
do you know what? Gladly go one-on-one with Undertaker for that comment. I get the point you're trying to make. Teddy Long was great. He was brilliant. He was comedy value. That's all really added was a comedy value. He never done anything as a
But
GM.
he had that voice, that controlled order. I mean, look at the way. See when they had the tournament to crown a new SmackDown champion because John Cena got drafted to Raw. And they had the tournament, but then Batista came out. The way JBL was on his knees saying, give it to me, and he was like saying no.
Not like that.
Holding
Not
him
like
back.
that.
It's like, because you're now the number one contender to this guy. It was funny. Look, Scott's laughing like mad at that. It was funny.
No, I think he's just laughing at the fact that you said JBL was on his knees saying, give it to me, give it to me.
It was brilliant stuff.
If only I always thought JBL was one of them.
For God's sake.
No, I get the point, right? I get the point, and I can't say anything bad against Teddy Long. You know, I can't argue that he was bad. He's not MVP level, and that's the point we're trying to make here. Is he better than Cena? Is he better than Eddie? Is he better than Edge? Sorry, no.
I think since Kwaku stuck up for me, I'm going to slightly stick up for him, and that Kwaku makes a good point in the fact that Teddy was like the voice of SmackDown for this whole period of time, and this was the better show going by the ratings. So he was basically the best voice in wrestling at the time. And also, like, this is kind of a bullshit point, but like, could you not make the argument that Teddy has had a significantly longer wrestling career than John Cena, Eddie Guerrero, or Edge are ever going to have? Teddy Long's been in the business for, I don't know, I think he was in like late 70s.
He was referee, manager,
managing The Undertaker in WCW. I remember that. Like, well, I remember it looking back on it. I wasn't alive in 1970.
You were there. There, front row.
Just missed it. Yeah, do you know what? The thing is, it's almost a different argument, isn't it? He's probably the best non-wrestling person of this era. He probably just edges Heyman because he probably had more TV time. And I was so sad when we got to that stupid 5-on-5 with Zack Ryder and Eve. Oh God, ruined everything. Like,
exactly.
I miss him every day of my life. Like, and
exactly.
Ryan's right. Like, this is the kind of person that we need in wrestling just now. Like, it was Mick Foley in like 2000, and then by the mid 2000s, it was Teddy. I think.
Can I just? I think there's one point I want to argue about against Teddy Long. Like, I mean, I think you guys, you talk about how his stint as general manager was certainly a memorable time, but he didn't really go out with a bang in his role. He sort of went out with a whimper. He sort of became the assistant to Vicky Guerrero, who overtook his place as general manager. Do you think that sort of damages, how, like, sort of the end of his time as GM in the Ruthless Aggression era?
Not really, especially because, let's be honest, Vicky was also a great general manager in her own right. As annoying as she was at that time, because I was a very marky mark watching wrestling, like I took it in exactly as it was told to me, and I loved, and I hated that woman. I hated her. I honestly cannot describe how much I hated that woman, right? But seeing her coming out in AEW, I was almost brought to tears because I'm like, yes. But see, if it was someone different, maybe I would have said, fair enough. But Vicky Guerrero's Vicky. Look at the reaction she got when she came out at the first Royal Rumble. Probably the biggest reaction, if not against Trish, maybe it's good, but the biggest pop was for Vicky coming out saying, excuse me. So in that sense, it would be different if it was like some random general manager, but it's Vicky Guerrero, and in a way it also helped put her over in that sense as that evil person, because everyone loved Teddy Long, and making him her slave kind of thing perfect.
Vicky Guerrero was a better GM than Teddy Long.
Get out here, Ryan.
Take that back.
Don't talk nonsense.
She was
Fight.
I hate Vicky so much.
Kwaku has just listed every reason why she was far superior to Teddy Long.
No, I said she's great, but Teddy Long was a better GM, in my opinion.
Who gets a bigger pop?
Who gets that continuously mentioned, continuously brought up in gifs, continually brought up in happy memories?
But remember, Vicky wasn't involved in the rest. Teddy Long's a longer career.
Thanks for that, Ryan.
Well, clearly Zoom doesn't like his comments, so shut him down.
He's been stunned by Quacko's argument. He's just frozen.
All right, I think we lost Ryan for a minute. Do we?
He'll be back.
Should we just carry on?
I think Zoom has cancelled Ryan because of his atrocious comment.
All right, so we
Ryan,
I really only one comment about about the whole Teddy Long thing. Is that part of the reason I think we shouldn't mention Teddy Long as our MVP is because simply authority figures should not overshadow the main talent, the actual wrestlers, and that's what we're doing. But if we select Teddy Long as MVP over the people that we have mentioned, because he was GM and he was one of the more popular GMs, but he really was GM for like 04 to like 07 start 08. If he was such a good GM, he wouldn't have had his power stolen by Vicky Guerrero. And also, we should forget he was also a manager in this period, and he managed such greats like Rodney Mack and Mark Gingerak, and he managed them to superstar. Oh wait, no, he didn't.
Well, I think
an MVP doesn't have to have a solid run all the way through an era. You all have to start from somewhere.
100%.
It depends. Whatever you make of that particular moment that you're doing, that's what sticks. That moment sticks in me. Yeah. I mean, Kane, for example, Kane's your favorite wrestler. Are you going to automatically dismiss him as your favorite wrestler because Corporate Kane was pish? So move on.
All right.
Hang on. Kane is Scott's favorite wrestler. Why doesn't he bring that up more?
All right.
He's totally brought up 44 times.
All right. All right, thank you, Kwaku. That was, I think that was quite a left field choice for the.
What do you expect from me?
Oh, you are a big fan of Teddy Long, so to be honest, that doesn't surprise me. But
can I just say a side thing? Teddy Long, please answer your email. I want to interview you. Sorry.
That would be amazing.
Oh, how good would that be? Eat Sleep Suplex retweets interviews Teddy Long. Right. Tell you what, fingers crossed. But you know what? I think all you guys actually made a very strong case for each of your first picks. Like, I think Ryan firstly made a great point. Cena was practically everywhere during this time, and there were some very big moments that he was a part of. Although I think your presentation of the argument was a bit vague, because you can't just say John Cena was the MVP just because he is. Because there was a lot of the guys were arguing a lot of points that there was a lot of division between the fans as a result. So I don't know if that maybe hampers you or not.
Dave, it sounds like you want your face band in, mate.
Chris, I think you made a very sort of strong opening monologue.
Scripted point.
You made a very good opening monologue for Eddie Guerrero. Although I think we have to address the fact that his time was cut short, that he didn't have as much time to really develop into a big star during this time. So that could be a hindrance on your part. Scott, Edge, like you said, he evolved into the ultimate villain over this time period. Although and he raised the bar in a lot of aspects. So, I mean, it's hard to argue against that. Although he did incur a lot of losses, just as many wins. And I don't know if that's going to be a hindrance in this argument. Now, Kwaku, you went completely left field from the rest of the people. You picked a guy who was basically and a lot of people would say probably one of the best general managers of the time, a tenured employee of WWE, and who was basically well renowned for his catchphrases. But I think the same people would argue that SmackDown was repetitive during this time, like the jokes and the tag team matches one-on-one with The Undertaker. Like, it did get to a point I think people were getting, it was saying it was too predictable and stuff. So I'm just trying to be looking at this from both sides here. So, and I have to be honest, I'm having a really tough time trying to pick a winning argument from you lot. But I think purely because of the amount of points raised on this aspect and the fact that it was argued with a lot of passion, and there wasn't as many arguments against the positive aspects, I'm going to have to award the first half to Chris with his argument for Eddie Guerrero. Now, Kwaku, you
Fair
were
enough.
a very close second with Teddy Long because you actually
I'll
did
take
put
that.
forward. Yeah. So, but you know
I'm
what?
doing the Eddie dance. I'm not having a stroke.
It just looks like you're trying to do the backstroke and you can't quite swim that strongly. That's the way you're doing it.
Yeah.
Can you
But
go
you know,
to Chris Murray's house? I think
yeah.
he's having a stroke.
Yeah. But you know what,
He's
Chris? I
well
think.
close.
Is he showing coronavirus symptoms?
Oh, for God's sake! Well, you know what, Chris? Your opening monologue and you're basically your continuous list of accolades listing Eddie is why he was the MVP. I think you pretty much you won this by a slight margin, so I'm gonna have to give you that.
Cheers, Dave.
So I hope you guys have got your second picks ready because we're going to do this whole debate again in our second half, but we're going to give everybody a bit of a breather just to calm down. And for this break, we're going to play the clip where Vince McMahon is demanding that the WWE roster shows some ruthless aggression from June 24th, 2002. So have a listen to that, and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retweet. My name is David Hockney. I am joined by Ryan, Chris, Scott, and Kwaku. And today we're discussing the MVPs of the Ruthless Aggression era. Now, the guys argued their points in the first half with John Cena, Eddie Guerrero, Edge, and Teddy Long. And the first half was won by Chris Murray, presenting his case for Eddie Guerrero. So that was well done, Chris. And now we're going to move into part two, where we're going to do the exact same thing over again, but just with different people. Kind of like the Hangover Part 2. So, Ryan, I'll start with you again on this one. Who is your second pick for the MVP of the Ruthless Aggression era?
Right, so this is a tough one because I'm fully expecting not to win on this, and that's a really strange one. I just wanted to put across the point, though, that for me, he was probably one of the best at this point that I enjoyed watching. And it's probably very controversial, and we won't touch on what happened in the aftermath. We'll talk about the wrestling and purely the wrestling. And my pick for an MVP for this time is Mr. Toothless Aggression, Chris Benoit. Now, that is a controversial point, and I do not condone anything that happened afterwards, and I'm not going to talk about that at all. I'm going to talk about Chris Benoit, the wrestler. When I was growing up watching wrestling with my dad, Chris Benoit was my dad's favourite wrestler to watch. So much so that there's actually a running joke now that, and he says it about Eddie Guerrero as well. He's convinced that Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit are not actually dead. They're going to come back one day in the wrestling. It's all kayfabe, and they're living on a secret island somewhere. And that's been an ongoing joke with me and my dad for years since I was a wee guy, and that's what he made me believe at the time. Right? So that's my memory, right? But Chris Benoit in the ring, and you know, for the highlight for me is that match at WrestleMania, the Triple Threat. I can probably not remember as many highlights due to not actively watching wrestling as much at this period in time. You know, like from before all this, I was kind of I touched on it at this point. But every time I watch a Benoit match, and you see bits of him just now in Daniel Bryan, where the moveset is pretty much the same. But Benoit was absolutely amazing in the ring. He was no nonsense. He came down to the ring, shaking the head, cracking the neck, came down, get down to business, left again. You know, there was no fanning about with entrances and stuff like that. He had the greatest theme music. I think you're probably going to pick in the wrestling. I would still listen to that just now as I should because it's amazing. For me, over this period of time, and the only reason I remembered Benoit for this point was the whole toothless aggression thing on the side because he had no teeth. That's the only reason he really popped in my head for this. I thought I need to make a point of talking about how good he was. So, as before, I'll welcome the chase. I'll welcome any criticism you've got on his wrestling. I don't know how anybody can criticise his wrestling, but go for it. Hit me with it, and I'll try my best to fight back.
I think that everything that I said about Eddie Guerrero in the first half, you can say about Chris Benoit in the second half. They achieved almost the exact same in their careers. They achieved almost the exact same in their careers in WWE. And even during these, what I think Eddie was 3 years and Benoit was 4 years, almost exact same belts, tag title, secondary title, world title. Their career paths were almost a complete parallel. Ryan obviously has touched on the fact that the end of Benoit's life was terrible. But that doesn't mean that we as wrestling fans aren't allowed to be sad that Benoit died. Like, I was crying when Benoit died. I was crying when Eddie died as well. Like, it was two hugely emotional points. Obviously, what happened is terrible and it's just completely separate. Benoit's one of those guys where you've got to separate the wrestling art from the man himself, because what happened, like, we're never going to know why that happened. I love this period of Benoit's career because it was a guy that you were just like, oh, he's great and everybody loves him, but he's just never going to get there. Like, WWE are just never going to see him that way. And then when he does finally start the rise from the Royal Rumble, eliminating Big Show, all the way to WrestleMania main event and the best triple threat match of all time, argue against me, is this perfect moment in wrestling. I said earlier, like, Eddie and Benoit hugging at the end of WrestleMania 20 is the epitome of Ruthless Aggression. Arguments against it, he couldn't really cut a promo.
Josie, just on that before you got.
Oh yeah, sorry.
The point you made about separating what happened to Benoit in the ring. Jericho talks about it as well just now. Jericho will still talk about it when people criticise him for mentioning Benoit. He comes in and says Chris Benoit is one of the greatest wrestlers that's ever lived. And that's Jericho, who some regard as the greatest character and wrestler that's ever lived. He puts that praise on to Benoit.
Mm-hmm.
He can separate that. And I think that's what I can do that as well. You know, I'm still sad that we don't get Benoit in the wrestling, because I feel like we should have a lot more to watch of him on the network, for example, post-career than what we've got. You know, we don't have enough of him. But the point you made about him, you know, it's actually a better point than I probably could have made when the comparison to Eddie. The careers were eerily similar, you know, in terms of, like you say, him being the guy that's never going to succeed, but then almost kind of does it. You know, you see that in wrestling quite a lot. You know, most recently with Kofi, should never have been there, as they always say. You know, fought through, got there, had his WrestleMania moment, and then whatever's happened after that, fine. But Benoit was kind of one of the kind of ones you think of, mostly for having that type of that type of rise.
And also, it should be pointed out that as well, and again, I've got my own argument coming up, but like, Eddie and Benoit both convinced each other to leave WCW because they knew they weren't going anywhere, right? So if that conversation hadn't happened between these two wrestlers, we wouldn't have this conversation now, because they wouldn't have been in the Attitude Era. They would have been in Japan, or they would have been, you know, retired, working in Starbucks. Like, we've no idea how it could have gone. Like, so yeah, like, Eddie owes a lot to Benoit, and Benoit owes a lot to Eddie.
Go points against, hit me a bit.
Well, he can't cut a promo, man. Like, there's no iconic Benoit promo like there is iconic Eddie promos.
He's
And
got
also,
no teeth. He's got no teeth.
And also, Benoit suffers from this issue of being like, right, well, that's Benoit walking down to the ring. Right, well, that's Benoit wrestling. Right, well, that's Benoit walking up the road. Like, there was nothing. It was just wrestling, which I get is an argument for why he's MVP. But there's no anything else to him. There's no the tenacity of Ric Flair. There's no the huge personas of Hogan, and like, there's none of that. It's just Benoit the wrestler. But it's good because we almost only want to talk about Benoit the wrestler and absolutely nothing else.
I've got a point to make, Ryan. Like, you know, you can argue that the triple threat match at WrestleMania 20 was probably one of the most iconic moments in WrestleMania history, where he stands side by side with Eddie, they're both holding world titles and stuff. Like, he'd reached the mountaintop and it was a fantastic moment. But he seems like one of those people, like, you know, he's much better being the chaser rather than the one being chased. And I think he suffered heavily as a result. And, you know, after his world heavyweight title run ended, you know, he only had one world title reign to his name. Like, for the following years, he basically only stuck around the United States championship scene. Like, he was an established world title competitor one year, and then the following year he's back to the upper mid card. Does that damage him?
Granted, his world championship reign, it wasn't a memorable reign. It was a memorable start. It wasn't a memorable reign. And like you say, I think Benoit's probably one of these guys who works better in the mid card. I think he does his probably best work, even in feuds, even actually wrestling folk in the mid card. I reckon he's probably better in that area. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't unbelievable. And like I said before, I don't expect to actually win this argument based on Benoit, right? I don't expect to win it because he doesn't have that memorable career like the points we kind of made before. But I feel like for what he done, for what we have of Benoit up until we didn't, if you were to take everything he's done individually every single week and actually look at it properly, you know, if we were to sit down just now and look at his career over this period of time, you'd be surprised at the kind of things that you didn't notice.
I've got a point, and I don't expect you to come back on this, Ryan. And I can't dispute what you're saying about Benoit as the wrestler and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sorry, I find it very difficult to separate them. I just can't, because of how gruesome the end was. And often when people talk about this in wrestling, and you talk about it on Twitter, and you see people mentioning it on Facebook groups and stuff like that, quite often the names of the victims are always forgotten about. You don't ever see people talk about the fact that Nancy and his son Daniel were killed in that. Nobody really talks about that, and that for me is a great shame in all of this. And that's why, like, I'm not disputing what you're saying, but I'm sorry, I find it really difficult because I'm also needing to be convinced from WWE's standpoint what they are actually doing in terms, because I mean we've done a show on mental health, and I sat on the panel on that one, and we're hearing discussions and talking about it, stuff like that. And I want to know is what are they actually doing in terms of mental health, because this has got a huge attribution towards mental health and the death and the circumstances. And I just don't think the aftermath has been dealt with properly and in the most. I don't know. It's for many reasons like that. I just can't separate. I'm sorry, I can't.
I don't disagree with you, and that's not a bad way to look at it. Because I look at it the exact same way. You know, I do feel like the end puts that taint on his full career. You know, it does put that, because you're never going to sit there and think of a Chris Benoit match, or you're never going to sit and watch a match now and think nothing ever bad happens, because you know fine well what happens. But the only point I was trying to make is in terms of wrestling, I did try and separate it, and I understand that folk can't. And to an extent, I can't separate it either. You know, you're always, it's always going to be there. It's always going to be linked together. But in terms of actually just being the wrestler, you know, if we are to sit and look at it and try and pick the points from his career, he had so many good matches. You know, he was such a great performer, and I find it quite sad to think that it might have been some form of negligence through WWE that wasn't the case. You know, I find that quite tough to think that came from nowhere. You know, a performer is always going to, you know, want to do whatever they want to do. You know, like you look at Daniel Bryan, for example, and I made the comparison to Daniel Bryan and Chris Benoit before.
It's quite a deep argument to discuss, obviously, because there's that lingering shadow of what happened afterwards. I think Kwaku sort of said it best. But yeah, it's definitely a controversial one, Ryan. But you do make some good points from the.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing now, but yeah, no.
Yeah. I think controversial.
It was just the understatement in the way he went. A bit of a controversial one.
Yeah. I mean, well,
just
I think. Oh yeah, just a bit, but yeah. Thanks for we're talking about the wrestler side
fair
of things.
Points, though. I would say fair points.
Yeah. Okay, so Chris, you won the first half. Can you make it 2 for 2 in this show? So
I deliberately didn't go on as much of a pure field day for my second choice as I did my first choice. But for my second choice, I didn't want to pick those any of those, there's a group of about 4 guys who defined this era, but I sort of wanted to pick someone that could be in with that conversation of they were the most valuable player and amongst all of the players. And so for my second pick, I went for Booker T. Now, Booker T is one of the few wrestlers, maybe 2, 3 maybe if we're going to loosely include Goldberg, but one of the few wrestlers who actually came from WCW when it died to the WWF and then E and actually had a good career. A lot of them just didn't. But Booker T has managed to really carve out a good 6-year run. If we're just talking about the ruthless aggression era, so obviously 2002 started with him being in one of the best tag teams ever with Goldust. They won the I always remember they won the WWF Tag Team of the Year this year. It was in WWF magazine back in the day. I always remember. In 2003, he asked Goldust if he could go off on a singles run, which Goldust let him, which led to him beating The Rock, the actual Rock, in a Rumble to win the number one contendership for the World Heavyweight Championship. He then went on to have that match with Triple H, which I think even Triple H has admitted that he probably shouldn't have won, which I think is a really high point in Booker's career. WrestleMania 19? Scott?
19, yep.
Yeah. Scott always knows these numbers. He then had his really great IC title run with Christian, where they were fighting over the belt for a while, and then he sadly gets injured around this time. 2004, he has this tag title run with RVD, which lasted for a short while and had a terrible theme, but I think I still remember. Then he went back to the US title for 2004 and 2005 before he hit what I think might have been his WWE peak in 2006 when he won the King of the Ring and then the World Heavyweight Championship, leading to him being both a Triple Crown winner and Grand Slam winner. And Ryan, come at me with this, right? If John Cena is such a good wrestler and the best of the Ruthless Aggression era, why did Booker T beat him in a World Heavyweight Championship match?
Because John Cena was using his stance to elevate Booker T.
Oh!
Incorrect. The correct answer was Kevin Federline. And you know what? We're all football fans in here, right? See, when you're such a good football player, what you do is you get poached by another team. Well, Booker T got poached by another team. In October 2007, he got poached to another stellar wrestling company called TNA. Ruthless Aggression existed elsewhere, right? He wrapped up the era by winning the TNA Legends Championship, confirming him as a legend of the last 6 years, something like that. Anyway, Booker T.
Can I go first here?
Yeah, go for it, Scott.
Well, first off, automatic points against Booker T for that mashup theme. Him and RVD's mashup theme has to be the worst mashup theme that's ever happened.
Or is it the worst theme?
Just in general, yeah.
Well, actually, yeah, I've watched back WrestleMania 20. They came out with that mashed up theme, and it's essentially Booker's with just one of a kind played at the start. There's nothing spectacular about it. I think the only thing less spectacular than it is the Miz and the Big Show's joint theme, where it's just the I came to play with a few Big Show catchphrases spread throughout.
Yeah, I think obviously everybody agrees that Booker should have won at Mania 19. That's probably the fault of the booking and not Booker T. And the thing is, from what I've heard, Booker was meant to win that match. And when you look at the storyline, then it made sense to. And also there's some last minute politicking that got this result changed. But I know this is a hard argument, mate, but surely if they had such faith in Booker to be the guy and be the World Heavyweight Champion, they wouldn't have, the powers that be wouldn't have stuck for that capability. They would have stayed the course and went, no, we want Booker T to win. He's going to go over Triple H, but they didn't. He was basically the perennial mid-carder of this era, and then, yeah, I can't argue against King Booker. He's one of the few people that's made the King gimmick actually work. And when it comes to 2007, I mean, you look at the controversial circumstances of how he exited. From what I understand, he refused to take a drug test, and so he asked for his release, and then showed up in TNA.
I didn't know that.
A month later.
No,
and then
apparently.
It's quite easy for him to win the Legends title when he created it and awarded it to himself. So he didn't really go through a hard battle to win that title.
I may have forgotten that detail. My only retort to that would be...
Chris, your argument's falling apart here.
My only retort to that would be if Eddie Guerrero can win the MVP of Part 1 after getting done for drink driving, Booker T can win MVP of Part 2 for getting done for banging the drugs, right?
Well,
Anyone?
It's not no deep that just so that Mr. T doesn't sue us.
Mr. T.
We're not saying he did drugs. We're saying he refused to take a test to see if he's been doing drugs. So some guilt on his part there.
Scott.
Scott, I've actually got a point here. Like a lot of the guys that the panel have argued already, they've had some really key moments, particularly on the big stage, WrestleMania. But Booker T's WrestleMania record during this time hasn't really been that spectacular, apart from, as aforementioned, WrestleMania 19. Like 2004, he's in a bit much a throwaway tag title match in the second match, which, as we know, is basically the worst place to be on a WrestleMania card. 2005, he was in the pre-show Battle Royal. And 2006, he loses a 2-on-1 handicap match against the Boogeyman, where he teams with Sharmell. Like, do you think this really sort of lackluster WrestleMania record is hampering the argument here?
So, can have helped, really. Because, like you said, like, a tag match is the worst place to be on, like, the undercard. No, it isn't. The worst place to be is not on the card at all, and that's what he was. He was in the dark match pre-show, which you wouldn't have known about unless you watched the DVD months later. And yeah, he won it, but the definition of a consolation prize right there is winning a dark match battle royal.
Plus, you don't have to headline WrestleMania to be the MVP.
In all fairness, though, his run as King Booker after King of the Ring, it probably is one of the most memorable characters he's ever produced in this era.
Fuck you, Sharmell.
That was so random.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Chris. So that's Chris Benoit and Booker T put on the section for part 2. Scott, the floor is yours now. Who is your second choice?
A point I forgot to make during Edges, but kind of applies to this person as well. And there's a common thing between the two of them. And that not only have they feuded, but they've also got banging themes, and they both used to come out to a lot of pyro, so there's a common theme running there.
I've just realised who it is.
That's a guy so tough that he voluntarily walks for miles inside a pit of danger as the Animal Batista. And I'm following on from what I said before. Where were they in June 2002, and where did they end up by 2008? And with Batista, yeah, with some people you can say, like, when they debuted, they're not the MVP. When they start, they're not the finished product. And you can say that about Batista when he started very late on than most people. He debuted as Deacon Batista, and like, surely that should have just been a death nail right from the start for him. But then Triple H, and that sees potential, and he joins Evolution. He works his way up as the heavy, and he's on the road with Triple H and Ric Flair, getting the knowledge, and then he starts that storyline, the slow build between him and Triple H, leading to that great moment on Raw with the contract for SmackDown, and then the thumbs down, which then led to him being responsible for ending one of the things that people hate about this era, and that's Triple H's reign of terror. He was the man to end the reign of terror, because after he beat Triple H, he beat him 3 pay-per-views in a row, the most anybody had ever gotten up on Triple H. At that period, he beat him in Hell in a Cell in the final match, which had kind of been turning into Triple H's match, because he'd been in like 4 Hell in a Cells before that and won every one of them. And the thing with that is, after Triple H lost to Batista, he didn't hold any world title, WWE or World Heavyweight, for another 2.5 years after that. So he put a stop to Triple H's reign of dominance, and then he moved over to SmackDown. And while rumors are he didn't really like being on SmackDown, he thought it was the B show. He was the guy there. He was the man going up against the likes of Edge, and he had the classic match with Undertaker in 2007. Yeah, he had the odd injury here and there, but he was basically the consistent. Because like, if Edge is the consistent heel on SmackDown, whenever Undertaker wasn't around, you had Batista as that good guy to go up against Edge to fight through La Familia or whatever that faction was called, and be the consistent like presence. And at the end of 2008, and as I said, he is the man to beat up Edge and leave Edge prone to finally get his comeuppance, to be on the receiving end of the Money in the Bank cash-in that I said before. So, yeah, Batista, I think I can think of like only a couple key WrestleMania matches we're talking about before, because like his first WrestleMania, he's teaming with Ric Flair and Randy Orton against Mick Foley and The Rock. The next year, he's in the main event winning the world title. 2 years later, he's in what should have probably been the main event against The Undertaker. And he's credited those matches with Undertaker as being the moment that really showed people what Batista is capable of.
I mean, some very, very solid points there. Guys, any evidence to the contrary?
I think it's a solid argument. And I think much like how Eddie and Benoit had very similar career paths, I think that John Cena's career path almost parallels Batista's, and that that even got worked into a rivalry at some point in 2009, 8.
Yeah, something like that.
The thing with Batista is Batista was the guy who was part of so many of your favorite moments in wrestling without you noticing it. Like, I think that's what was really great about him. He was actually like really, really good in this period of time. But I think the only downside of Batista at this period of time is, ask any wrestling fan in the world. Nobody says, "Oh, Batista was my favorite wrestler in the Ruthless Aggression era." Like, Ryan, Batista is the near Beaton of wrestling at this point in time. He's absolutely solid, but nobody's, going out and getting near Beaton on the back of a shirt. He's Jason Orange and take that. He's so reliable, but he's just maybe not everybody's favorite.
Chris,
And albeit,
Chris, Jason Orange left, take that.
exactly.
It's like Batista went to Hollywood.
Exactly. It writes itself. Jason Orange versus Batista for WrestleMania. Anyway, so yeah, it's a great argument, but that's the thing that I always come back to with him is like, nobody's ever like, oh, I love Batista so much. Like, look at when he came back the first time and he just got booed out the building for a year before he left. Like that I feel like he gets a lot of hate and he needs to rise above it.
I will argue. Can I just argue your point, Chris? Like, my brother was a massive fan of Batista on the build up to WrestleMania 21, and I even remember the first. And Ryan, I actually want to pick up something you said on a previous show. Is when you talked about this this interaction you had with Batista at a live event at the Royal Highland Centre in Edinburgh. I'm
Where
pretty
he nearly
sure.
touched his dick.
Yeah, that's the one.
Ryan, how big is Batista's dick? Age-old question.
Big enough that my horns nearly touched it.
Right. Let's get back on track.
You brought it up.
But you hijacked it. But I can
Hold on, Dave. I felt like that was just a reason to pick that up there. That didn't make any sense to the argument, did it?
I know.
Nah. I was just saying, I was at that very same live event, and my brother got a Batista T-shirt as a result. Like, that goes to how, like,
He's
his
going to say
argument.
a Batista ball.
Well, I got his Willie, so shut it.
But I think that sums up Batista's career best. It was kind of like an
What Ryan touching his dick?
Can we get away from the topic?
You brought it up. You brought it up.
Sums up my career pretty fucking well.
See, from like Benoit to this podcast has been an emotional roller coaster.
Oh,
we went from real
that's an
like a
understatement.
pit of danger right now. Like Batista went through when he had to go through shit like the bloody Punjabi prison, but he got a good match at a good. Okay, he looked good compared to Great Khali in that match. He did that leap from one of the cages to the next one.
That was a pretty cool moment, actually. Yeah. But is there any other like further critique of Batista? I mean, I know he sort of left in 2010, but he was basically there the entirety of the Ruthless Aggression era. And was there anything about his title runs that really stood out to people?
Well, something I can bring up is it not known that Batista lost a backstage fight with Booker T? So does that put Chris ahead?
Kwaku, my guy.
I feel like you're just supporting each other's arguments here rather than arguing against them.
Cahoots, I tell you.
Yeah, I do remember that story. Well done, Booker T.
Conspirators.
But to pick up actually on a point, like I think you guys mentioned before, like I think Chris said it best. He's basically the near baton of WWE. Like, I mean, sure, he was.
Look above my head. See that reference? Just going way over it.
I mean, Batista was popular, and he did have a very credible run as the top guy, but he just wasn't the golden goose like John Cena was. Like, do you think Batista could have been the guy had Cena not been around?
I think he still was technically the guy. Like the fact that he won the Rumble over Cena, even though Cena went on to that same WrestleMania to win the title. The fact that he won, I think, just goes to show that he was the biggest star. And I think the fact that they just swapped him over to SmackDown, yes, SmackDown's not considered the show in WWE's eyes. The fact that he and Zay were basically the mainstays of their individual shows. I think they were on that even. I just don't think we should criticise Batista for WWE's decision against of pushing John Cena because I don't think the fans ever turned on Batista like they turned on John Cena. So that's the point I got on Batista, because Batista.
You brought up that Royal Rumble, and all I'm thinking of is Vince sitting on the floor looking so angry. I just can't get that image out of my head.
See, I think that argues against Batista, because it's basically Vince McMahon that stole the show away from Batista's big win.
By accident.
Well, his fault. His fault thing went wrong.
But anyway, Scott, thank you for delivering Batista as your second argument. And we've got one more left before we'll decide a winner, and then we'll get some listener feedback as well, like to see if there's any we've missed. So, Kwaku, floor is yours.
Yep. So my MVP cannot be disputed at all. Now, Dave, at the start, you actually said you may need to rework your intro again, because at the very start you said, no, this isn't about Montel Vontavious Porter. I'm afraid it's got to be about him, because when you're talking about Ruthless Aggression era MVPs, there is a guy called MVP, so therefore he must be the MVP. So I present to you MVP. Discuss.
But he was shite.
But he's called MVP.
It doesn't matter.
We're talking about Ruthless Aggression MVPs. Was MVP in the Ruthless Aggression era?
It was, yeah.
Okay, is his name MVP?
Yes.
So we're talking about Ruthless Aggression era MVPs. So there we go. MVP. I rest my case.
He wrestled in the PG era as well. And then he's wrestling the current era. So he's a current era MVP and a PG era MVP as well.
Exactly.
What is the logic
There's my point. He's the MVP because his name is MVP.
It's talking shit.
I would say that's quite cool. Like, do you think MVP was basically his arrival on SmackDown was basically trial by fire? Literally, as his first major pay-per-view match was against Kane in an Inferno match, and he was set on fire.
Look at the way his vignettes, the way he came into SmackDown with that whole aspect of he's in the crowd and all this kind of stuff. He's got these ladies flocking at him, and the creation of the VIP lounge, which has some very iconic moments. But again, I'll bring it back to his name is MVP. So it's therefore he is the Ruthless Aggression era MVP.
Can I just say, everybody talks about his record-breaking US title reign having, and it's not an accomplishment to really be taken lightly. But really, what else did he do in WWE? Other than, I know you're going to mention that one moment that he was involved in. You've talked
what
about
moment is that?
Him and Mr. Kennedy with Kane and Undertaker.
Oh yeah, that bit. Yeah, that was hilarious as hell. But yeah, anyway,
he finally lost the US belt to Matt Hardy after doing very well with it. He beat, I think it's first ever Night of Champions, he beat Ric Flair randomly. He then got into a feud with Matt Hardy because he couldn't
wait a minute here. He beat Ric Flair randomly. I mean, Ric Flair is a 16-time world champion, the first double Hall of Famer. You can't really say he beat Ric Flair randomly. That's not really fair.
I say randomly because I cannot remember. I remember the match happened. I don't remember why it happened, like many matches of this period. And
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Kwaku. So Ruthless Aggression. What are the years of Ruthless Aggression again?
2002 to 2008, June to June.
Cheers, Dave. When did MVP debut, Kwaku?
Sometime.
August 2006. It was almost done.
I know.
So he made most of the time that he was there, and his name was again MVP.
He had a nearly year-long US title reign, and then did very little after that. He just kept losing. Then they gave him the US title again after the Ruthless Aggression year, and then he did fuck all after that.
You're not feeling me on this, are y'all?
In all fairness, he was a double champion. He was US and tag team champion with Matt Hardy.
Yeah, because Matt did all the work because he was injured.
And they did have that series of matches where it was kind of like, it echoes what the Viking Raiders and the Street Profits done in sort of recent times. It's like, anything you can do, I can do better. They were doing like a basketball challenge. They were doing pizza eating contests, beer drinking. That's kind of sums up MVP's rivalry with Matt Hardy. You know, it wasn't like a match feud. It was a contest kind of feud.
Yeah,
So-
man.
I say the difference between them and the Viking Raiders thing is MVP Matt Hardy's thing was good.
I mean, you're not wrong on that front. But I think Scott makes an excellent point, Kwaku. Like, his time in Ruthless Aggression was basically only summed up by, one lengthy title reign. I mean, he never even challenged for a world title during this time. Like,
No, I think he did actually. He was in the WWE Championship Scramble, was he not?
but that was after. That was
Oh,
after the
I
Ruthless
thought he didn't.
Aggression. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. So
Never mind.
basically, MVP was just a prominent mid carder, like a reliable mid carder at best. I mean,
Dave, just say it. Just say it. He was a nobody. For the 2 years that he was in for the Ruthless Aggression era, he was a nobody.
He's a reliable draft pick at the moment, but in the Ruthless Aggression era, he did too much.
But guys, do you guys notice that the word that is used the most in all of our arguments, in particular my argument, is the phrase MVP, and that's what we're discussing here. And MVP is just the most in this discussion. Therefore, I should win.
Kwaku, I think you're struggling to convince the panel here on this one.
That's right.
Here,
I hope everyone on Twitter starts going, Quacker was right, it was MVP. I hope that's what happens.
Just for the record, he was in the Elimination Chamber match at No Way Out 2008, so he did at least fight once for a belt.
It was
that was for an opportunity, not for the title itself.
Cut that.
He did take a hell of a bump, though. He got chokeslammed off the top of a pod.
Let's remember him for that and not being MVP.
But if I can give another positive argument to MVP, his entrance was pretty spectacular with the whole inflatable tent and stuff, and he had the pyro and the smoke behind the screen. Like, his personal sort of entranceway, I think that sort of made him stand out, don't you think?
Absolutely. And the clock ticking, everything was just on point. The diamonds, the glasses, the swagger he had, the run back, and then the falling. Yeah, the guy is MVP. I'd say again, MVP. It's been said the most during this argument, so therefore I should win purely for that example.
Guys like Jeff Hardy, Triple H, Kurt Angle are all listening to this podcast going, why have we spent so long talking about MVP?
It would be something if we found out that Triple H listens to this podcast.
Big Show, Brock Lesnar.
Vince will probably be listening in his Greenwich lair right now and saying such good shit.
I mean, Triple H, and I said earlier that everybody hated Triple H during this time. That's probably when Triple H turned this episode off.
Anyway, thank you, Kwaku. That was a very interesting argument, to say the least. Again, a lot of good points from these picks. So we had Chris Benoit, Booker T, Batista, and MVP. So I think it's not as difficult to try and pick a winner compared to the first half, because I think in some aspects the arguments against each of these picks were a bit stronger. But I think there was one person in particular who I think there was least to argue against, and
Quacker.
and but I think given the list of the accolades and the fact they basically described an evolution of this character, I think in this case Scott made the best argument for Batista.
I agree with that.
So yeah, fair play, Scott. I think you made some good points. Batista, given where he started, he was basically Reverend Devon's assistant as Deacon Batista, and look where he was by the end of the era. Multiple world heavyweight champion. He had some iconic feuds with The Undertaker and Triple H. He was the one to end Triple H's reign of terror, and he was a very prominent fixture in the world title scene. So, and I think that's, even though you compared his run to Cena's as a parallel, Chris. It was still a very memorable and successful run. So
you talked about that fight with Booker T. Booker T won a battle, but clearly today on this podcast, Batista has won the war.
Yeah, in this case, I think Batista wins the argument for MVP in this war. So that's our list of MVPs from this open panel discussion. So from Chris's side, we've got Eddie Guerrero as our first Ruthless Aggression MVP, and on the second half we have Scott's pick of Batista. So let us know on our social media feeds what you thought, who won that argument between our panelists. But I do have some listener feedback as well. Some of the names we haven't been mentioned as well on Twitter, like there was Kurt Angle, Brock Lesnar, RVD. I'm going to open up to the panel now. Like any names we've not suggested, do you think there's a case why those guys could also be considered the MVP?
I think there's a case. I think there's a case for most top guys to be in this argument. You know, you talked about Kurt Angle, Brock Lesnar, etc. There, obviously, they're going to be in the discussions for who's going to be the MVP. But I think the ones that we've all picked probably outshine those two in particular, at least.
I think there's also one name that I want to mention that nobody's mentioned, and it could be said that this person outweighs all of the achievements of all of the other wrestlers combined. And that is, you can make the argument that one of the MVPs of the Ruthless Aggression era would be Trish Stratus.
Ooh.
But it's okay, because we're going to cover that on the Women's MVP podcast, right?
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
See what? Great idea, Chris. It's that's an idea for a future show. We'll discuss our female MVPs possibly in a future show.
I will not be involved in that.
Wow.
Hey, everybody here is a coward for not mentioning Luther Reigns. I mean, what a career that man had.
See, when you said Trish, I was actually thinking, because of the era we're talking about, I was going to say more Beth Phoenix.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Just because of the era, like, yeah, Trish was amazing. I think it was like the start of Ruthless Aggression, but more the Attitude Era, just for like her rivalry with Lita and so many others, and her product was. But I think in the context with a Ruthless Aggression, only I think Beth Phoenix just pips her personally.
I think Beth Phoenix sort of joined at the start of the PG era because she was introduced in 2007, but she was out for a year with like a broken jaw, so she didn't really make a big impact until.
I mean,
like the
David, these are spoilers for the women's show.
I know. Just piss on her chips, mate. Why not?
she won her first women's championship in 2007, so she counts. Thank you very much.
Okay.
More so the bloody MVP did.
Oh.
Right, I've got one more name I'd like to bring up as well. This was mentioned from our Twitter responses as well. John McFarlane says one of the...
Never heard of him. He's not a wrestler.
He's not even real. That's not even a real person.
He's one of our listeners, but he also suggests Rob Van Dam.
Totally.
Yeah.
So,
One Night Stand 2006.
That was a
Or
very...
5.
No,
Whatever
2006. You were 2006. You were right. Yep.
The same points against him as there were for Booker T, simply for that mashup theme.
I mean, RVD is great and all that, but he's only got one of the letters of MVP. But someone who's got all three of the letters is MVP.
So I think what we've derived from this podcast is that the letters MVP are taken seriously, both in metaphorical and literal context, particularly in Kwaku's case. But I think we'll wrap up the argument there. So congratulations to Chris and Scott for their arguments, and the winners of the MVPs of the Ruthless Aggression era are Eddie Guerrero and Batista.
And Dave, just before you do your closing point, right? So the Ruthless Aggression era, 2002 to 2008, right? Mm-hmm. 2005, that's the middle of that, right? Why not go to the middle of 2005 and watch No Mercy 2005, headlined by Eddie Guerrero versus Batista for the world title.
Very good. Yeah.
Mind blown.
There you go.
Wow.
There you go. As soon as you listen to this podcast.
Life, Chris.
There you go, listeners. As soon as you've listened to this podcast, check out No Mercy 2005, Batista versus Eddie Guerrero for the World Heavyweight Championship. But that's going to wrap it up for today's show. Firstly, thank you to my panel, Chris Murray.
Cheers, Dave. Thanks for making me win.
Scott McLeod.
Thank you very much. The appointment to the destroyer.
Ryan Gallagher.
Fuck you, Dave.
And also the MVEP Kwaku Aje.
Yep, and you're next to have a one-on-one match with The Undertaker for not picking any of my MVPs.
Oh, well.
Despite one of them being called MVP, by the way.
So if you enjoyed this week's show, be sure to follow us on Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, all good Android podcasting sites, Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retweet, and Suplex Retweet Extra. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Suplex Retweet. We've got new shows coming out every Thursday on our main channel, this channel here. And be sure to follow Suplex Retweet Extra to get all our bonus content, including Saturday Draft Live, Eats Meets West, Raw Report, and anyway, back to the wrestling. So all that remains for me to say is stay tuned next week, where we'll be discussing the history of the G1 Climax for all you New Japan Pro Wrestling fans out there. All that remains for me to say is my name's been David Hockney, and this has been the Ruthless Aggression MVP show. We will see you next week.
Ladies and gentlemen, Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retweet now proudly presents Suplex Retweet Extra! Get bonus content on WWE, AEW, NXT, WCW, Scottish and World Independent Promotions! Subscribe now on Spotify, Apple, and Android podcasting sites, as well as YouTube. Head over to suplexretweet.com now!